Most of it comes from nostalgia for me. It was the first Zelda game I'd played.
I have to admit straight off, it was the first Zelda game I played.
There's only one reason for that, and that was because it was the first Zelda I've played.
I was completely enthralled by the mechanics of the game. I hadn't really, up until then, I know it's hard to believe, but up until then, never completed a Zelda. I always hit an impasse with some section of the game I couldn't get past, and then I got distracted with something else, something that we're all very familiar with.
They were barely ever necessary. You unlocked like one dungeon with them, but, just being able to use them and basically kill all the enemies on the screen, they were just fun. It just was a fun experience to just get those, use those, wipe out enemies. It was just a fun thing.
You come to this bridge in the game, and there's these monkeys guarding it, and the bridge is all broken. And if you have gone through the game and you've basically got to a certain situation where someone has given you a banana, give the banana to the monkey, he'll build a bridge.
And I also liked the ice rod for that reason, just freezing enemies with it. It was just a fun thing to do with that. And it was really nice that it seemed like a weapon like that was put in the game just to have fun with it.
Beings called the Twilly invade Hyrule, and they herald from the Twilight Realm, and they're led by their king Zant. A character called Midna kind of takes the same role as Navi in Ocarina of Time, except she's not an annoying little piss weasel.
There's this one particular bit where they had this jug which could blow air out. It's a very useful item, but it could also blow and suck things and that sort of thing. And one of the things it could blow away is cobwebs.
I remember with Ocarina of Time, I used to go through for my sister. My sister wanted to ride the horse but didn't want to actually play the game, so I had to go through and do the first 3 dungeons. She goes, "Can you just get me to the bit with the horse?" Yeah, sure, brilliant. More Zelda. And I'd get her there, and then after that she'd get bored. But it was worth it.
It increased your health, or it lowered the cost of your magic spells. But the problem was that when you got when you got it up and you got a new magic spell, it would cost a lot more. So if you had leveled up all the way, it had basically cost against you, and that was still a very high level spell, and that was a problem.
A lot of Zelda fans got really annoyed by him having his sword in his right hand rather his left hand. I don't know why that was a huge deal. I haven't played previous ones, so obviously having the sword in his left hand is a major story point that I clearly missed.
But I would say that one of my most fun things to do in that game was to just power up the sword, hold it out, and to just charge into those little knights that had the swords with it, and to just duel with them. That was always a really fun thing to do in Link to the Past.
Man, I can't believe you guys never played this game. That drives me crazy. That's insane to me.
I'm sold. I want to buy that thing.
I want to play that game now.
You need to play it. Guys, it's on the Wii. Download it, please. It is the best of the Zelda games. Please download it.
I know, I'm gonna.
I've always been told it's not that good.
...1986, The Legend of Zelda.
So the original Zelda is my favorite Zelda game. It may not be the best Zelda game ever made, but it's my favorite. It's my favorite for a lot of reasons. One, it is what started my love affair with video games. I got an NES for Christmas when I was 5, I think, and I got 2 games. I got the Super Mario Brothers Duck Hunt game, obviously, that everybody got, but then I got this golden plastic cartridge that was shiny and called to me as a small child. And that was the original Zelda. And I played the shit out of the original Zelda. Because, it was one of the first games you could actually save anything in, which was great, because there was no way you were going to play through that in a sitting. But that game triggered some impulse in me that compelled me to spend hours and hours burning every single tree on a screen and keeping books of elaborate graph paper maps for both quests. So it really triggered this expansive, exploring mentality in me that I would carry on into lots of role-playing games and larger exploration-type games for a long time. I mean, that game really crystallized what, I guess, early action, to call it action now sounds a little ridiculous, but it really crystallized what early action gameplay could be, and taking elements from these broader RPG games like the original Final Fantasy games and bringing some of those elements like items and things like that into a game that wasn't that deep and wasn't so much of a dice roll based Dungeons and Dragons type of thing, into a game that was more of an action and adventure game that I think, as a kid anyway, I related to a little better. I have to have played through this game a minimum, at least the first quest all the way through I've played completely at least 8 times, maybe 10 times over the course of my life. I love this game. From all of the varieties of enemies and landmarks to all the hidden stuff you could track down. This set up a gameplay type that we take for granted now. The Zelda run through a dungeon, find a tool, use that tool to kill a boss mentality that didn't exist before the original Zelda. It had what for the time was a great soundtrack that got stuck in your head and still bounces around in my brain to this day. Graphics that are charmingly 8-bit, to say the least. And, a story that everybody could get behind. It had a story that was not very deep, not very fleshed out, but interesting enough to keep you going. It was a little more than you got from things like Mario Brothers and stuff like that at that point. It was a real accomplishment to beat that game. It was difficult. And anybody who's wandered around the 9th dungeon in that game knows that unless you are either some sort of savant or kept really, really meticulous records, because this was before the dawn of the internet when we couldn't just look up facts or graphic maps that somebody had made for us, figuring out which of those 8 different stairway passages in that dungeon went where was damn near impossible. So, a real sense of achievement. The expansiveness and openness of it was crazy for the time, and the fact that after you beat it, there was a whole second quest where the world was the same size, but everything was now in a different place, and you could randomly walk through dungeon walls and things, was nuts. There was a whole second game there that a lot of people probably never played, or if they did play, just messed with a little bit, but there was 2 entire Zelda-sized games in that one.
1987, Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link.
Followed, of course, by Zelda 2, which was very different and sort of an abomination to the Zelda name, which I'm sure someone will hate me for, but I don't care.
Mostly because it didn't really feel like Zelda for the most part. One thing I didn't like was the dungeons. I didn't like the layout of the dungeons, the way you had to go through them. It was so easy to get lost.
Here's why Zelda 2 was different. Zelda 2 was a side-scroller. They tried to somehow breed Zelda and Metroid together and make some weird hybrid of the two. And I would talk more about it if I had played it recently or remembered a lot of it, and I don't. I played it back then because it said Zelda on it, and I was already hooked by that point. It was just this weird kind of abomination like, okay, people like this Zelda thing, but people like a lot of our other games. Let's see if we can jam some Metroid and some other 2D side-scrolling type games in there and make this crazy super game that everyone will love. And for my money, it didn't work. It was just this very disjointed feeling. Like there was still an overworld map that you ran around on that was top-down, but then you would go into sections where you were side-scrolling and trying to fling knives at things, and it was very strange. And I didn't like it. It felt to me like it got away from a lot of the things that made the original Zelda great and really addicting, and that expansive open worldness and exploring for all the little secrets and hidden items and all that stuff. I don't know. It did not crystallize for me. and it kind of set me away from my love of Zelda a little bit until Link to the Past came out and was also phenomenal.
One of the things I like best about the Zelda series is the notion that there has been a different Link every generation, and living up to his name, the green-suited fairy boy is what binds all of these adventures together. Each is like a play with a Peter Pan-like hero, the ageless princess, the hissable villain, usually but not always Ganon, a handful of sages to dole out advice, bosses, mini-bosses and sub-bosses all waiting in the wings to reveal their weak spots, a magical and usually annoying guide who never knows when to shut up, various townspeople with side quests to give you, and the Master Sword just waiting to be plucked from its new resting place. Best of all is the character of Hyrule, a New Zealand-like mini Pangaea where mountains, rivers, volcanoes and forests are all within relatively short distance of one another. This dreamlike world designed to fire off every adventure-hungry synapse in our brain is why we keep coming back.
And I'm going to try and explain my history of Zelda within 1 minute. First game was Link to the Past, and I recall it was bizarre that you played this hero that actually had to find his first weapon. Then I got to Dark World, thought, whoa, what the hell? And then it just got too hard and I gave up. Next up, Ocarina of Time, amazing. Even today, still one of the best examples of how to close a game. Wind Waker, refreshing visuals, but I hardly ever died. Amazing black and white part. Awful bit at the end where you have to go around for ages looking for stuff. Minish Cap on the Game Boy, so much more charm than Phantom Hourglass or Spirit Tracks on the DS. Twilight Princess, a mechanical improvement over Ocarina, but without the inventiveness. And as for Majora's Mask, not played it. I know.
The Triforce of Wisdom, Link. The evil wizard Ganon has the Triforce of Power. Whoever gets both Triforces will rule this land forever. You must help me, Link.
Hey, for you, Zelda, anything.
Hero.
Hey, excuse me, princess.
Did you see the latest Nintendo newsletter?
Whoa, nice graphics. I'd like to get my hands on that game.
You mean you haven't played it yet? We can play it on my Nintendo Entertainment System. It's the Legend of Zelda, and it's really rad. Those creatures from Ganon are pretty bad. Octoroks, Tektites, Levers, too. But with your help, our hero pulls through. Yeah, go Link. Yeah, get Zelda.
Awesome.
Intense.
The Nintendo Entertainment System. Your parents help you hook it up.
1991. The Legend of Zelda, A Link to the Past.
Well, I actually came to Zelda pretty late, 9 years after the series started. I never had an NES, and I got my Super Nintendo in, I think it was early 1995. I'd never been quite sure about this Zelda game. I'd seen it on the shelves, obviously, in the shops, and a friend of mine was saying how good it was, but I remember the reviews back at the time in the British magazine weren't that sort of overboard. It has to be said, I think the first Zelda, because the NES was never a massive deal over here, the first Zelda wasn't such a famous thing. You know, like, I knew about Robin Williams naming his first daughter after the character Zelda and things like that, but then Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link, which I've played since on the GameCube collection, is a very different game and not an entirely fun one. But Link to the Past, I remember getting I think like an 89% review in CMVG magazine, and so I'd been kind of like, okay, I'd never really been into RPGs either. My experience of them was mostly with the Western ones. But one day I saw it for 20 quid. It came in a nice gold, this is A Link to the Past, of course, on the SNES, Zelda 3, if you will. So in a nice shiny gold box, in a store that we had at the time called Beatty's. It was £20. I thought, that's fair enough. Worth a gamble. Took it home and played nothing else for 2 weeks. It was just incredible. absolutely super tight design. That was the thing which really struck me, as well as having an amazing soundtrack, atmospheric sound effects, and indeed atmospheric rain effects at the start. It just, everything in the game, and this is what I started to learn about Japanese game design, but particularly Miyamoto's work and his team there, the main Nintendo team, was that nothing in there was spare, nothing was wasted. From growing up with Western games, there were often sort of large sections which were just kind of in there and didn't have any real purpose, but everything in Zelda, every puzzle, every nook, every cranny, every secret, every bombable wall, everything was in there for a purpose, for a reason, to make you feel good. And the logic puzzles, both of the individual dungeons, of which I think there were 8, and the amazing light dark world mechanic where you could flip the world and you would reappear basically on the other side of this Mode 7 map, was just genius. I'd never played anything quite like it, and I guess that was probably my first JRPG, although obviously the Zelda games don't share that many tropes with when you think of your Square type JRPGs. So from then I went on to sort of pick up more and more games in the series, and to date I think I've played all of I think there are 13 or 14 now in the main series, and I've played all of them. I've not completed every single one. I've not completed any of the 3 ones that Capcom did for the Game Boy Color and the Game Boy Advance. I've only completed one of the DS games. I completed the Phantom Hourglass, but I haven't been back to Spirit Tracks. And Eiji Aonuma, he took over from Miyamoto as director in '99 after Ocarina of Time, which was also a majestic entry in the series. That was Zelda 5. Aonuma took over and made Majora's Mask using the same engine as Ocarina of Time. I've never actually completed Majora's Mask because it's really melancholy, it's really sad. That's one of the interesting things about the Zelda games, is that although mechanically they cover a lot of the same ground, and that's actually proving to be a problem as the series goes on, because they're trapped in that situation where if they change things too much, that they're going to alienate the fans. But the fact that they stick to the same basic premise of new dungeon, new item completes dungeon, item kills dungeon boss, it's very difficult for them to break away from that. But stylistically, to go from Majora's Mask and then just 2 years later to the wonderful cartoony world of the Wind Waker, which was of course famously greeted on the internet with gasps of horror at the time, but now is, I think, widely quite fondly remembered, apart from that infamous overly lengthy quest in the latter stages to sail across the sea and pick up all the shards of whatever it was. Then the Twilight Princess came along after Four Swords, which was great as well. Twilight Princess, I think, is often much maligned now, but I absolutely loved it. I played it on the GameCube. I didn't get the Wii version, and yeah, it was a total retread. I think that's why people had a problem with it. But again, it very much had its own atmosphere, and for the time, visually, it was really splendid. But I suppose it should make me a little bit sad that although I've played so many Zeldas and enjoyed them all to some degree or other, some of them, like Ocarina, absolutely amazing, but I think Link to the Past is still my favourite of the series. It's just a perfect video game, and it's 15 years now since I've played it properly. I've popped back to it now and again for a burst of nostalgia. I've got it on Virtual Console, of course. I eBayed my cartridge complete with unopened, sealed tips book some years back and got a decent price for it. But Link to the Past, yeah, I just think it's pretty much a perfect video game, and it kind of typifies everything that was good about that era of Nintendo and in the early Super Nintendo days.
Really refreshing, just amazing. I enjoyed so much of it. You know, every moment that I played it, it just felt like an experience. I just had a lot of fun playing it. I would go through it and I would enjoy the experience the whole time. Going through it, it's made me really want to relive that experience. Playing through future Zelda games, I've had fun playing them, but it's never quite had the same feel as Link to the Past.
Technically it's not the best, graphically it's not the best, there's game mechanics in there which, you know, are quite dated and they don't work right now, but Zelda isn't about that. Zelda is about Link, you know, the little boy who finds a sword and shield and goes off to rescue the princess and save the day. And the way that Nintendo deliver this, and this is how they do it every time. It's why the story doesn't change. It's why they keep the same mechanics. It's because young and old, you know, you can understand the premise. It's just you saving the day. Link, he comes to town. He comes to save the Princess Zelda. It's beautiful in its simplicity, and it just works so well. I could say, you know, probably on your show you've got people that are saying Ocarina's the best. You've got people saying Phantom Hourglass is the best. But for me, it's subjective. It's to whatever Zelda you played first. If you really got and you played it and you understood Zelda, then that first one you played will be your favourite.
No, it wasn't my first one. My first one was the first Zelda game, The Legend of Zelda on the NES. I had played that first, and then I played Zelda 2, and that one I just flat out didn't like. And then this one just felt like a shiny, colorful, huge improvement over the first one. It's got the best controls. It just feels really easy to move and attack and handle.
Are you a fan of the later games in the series?
Oh yeah, I like the later games in the series. They're a lot of fun, but I would still have to say that I had the most fun playing Link to the Past, and I've gone back and I've replayed it to verify that, and yeah, I'd still say that Link to the Past is still my favorite game.
I really feel like they pretty much cast the mold for what all subsequent Zelda games became after A Link to the Past. One of the reasons that it's my favorite, this is an odd sort of circuitous connection, but it comes back to Mario 64. And when I got the Nintendo 64, and Mario 64 was clearly a Mario game. It was within that universe. It followed all the basic tenets of a Mario game, but it turned it all so differently. And, it was a whole new presentation of a Mario game. And I had a similar expectation when the Zelda game arrived for the N64. And I got it and was sorely disappointed because I felt like all they had really done was taken A Link to the Past and tilted the camera down so that you were down at Link's level. And, the rest of the game really just felt like a rehash of A Link to the Past to me. And a lot of them since that time have had a similar feeling for me.
1993. The Legend of Zelda, Link's Awakening.
Link's Awakening, the only game when you can take a chomp for a walk.
I remember the first time I played a Zelda game, and it was when I was quite late to the whole gaming scene, really, compared to most of the people you've probably spoken to. But I can't remember if it was, I think it was A Link to the Past. Was that the one that came out with the Game Boy Color, or was it Link's Awakening?
Link's Awakening was on the Game Boy Color, the DX version, which was like a recolored one.
Yeah, so it was that one. So I played Link's Awakening from start to finish. In the space of about 3 days. I just sat there because I got a Game Boy Color for Christmas, and it was one of the only games I got with it. And I got completely hooked. I loved everything about it. I loved exploring the temples. The temples, for some reason, had this effect on me where they sort of just stayed with me like a character. Each temple kind of felt like a character as opposed to like a level, which was like really new to me. So I sort of embraced it a lot more, because the characters were not only the characters in the game, but also the levels and where you're exploring. And I thought it was wonderful.
I think it's set just after Link to the Past in the storyline. So he's basically travelling across the sea and ends up being shipwrecked on this mystical island. But the good thing about this game was that you bump into new characters, and you're on this new island, and it's a completely different storyline, basically. So it isn't the same old walk around in the countryside, meet the woodland people, figure out about this mythical sword, go after so many bad guys. The same thing is, really, you're on an island this time. You've got to go through 8 dungeons, I believe, and find 8 specific things to lead to the final boss or area to complete the game. You start walking up the road and you come across this mystical owl that sets up the story for you, and it explains the story about this mystical windfish which is asleep. I believe it's in an egg. The cool thing was every time you beat a boss, you got like a new musical instrument, and he would collect this thing and it would just play a little tune and he'd be like, oh cool, okay. And of course when they all came together at the end, it played the full tune. So I think, if I believe correctly, you might have got maybe a violin or a guitar, but the most important one was getting an ocarina. The cool thing about this was that basically you got the ocarina and you had to learn new tunes. I think this was the first Zelda game to encompass that. And of course you always associate the ocarina with the N64 title a few years later. I can't remember the other items, to be honest. I think there was a drum, a little tin drum as well. You'd pick up an item, you were given an item by somebody. I think it was, you started with a letter. And on the letter it gave you a vague clue on who to give this letter to. Once you gave that letter to somebody, they'd say, oh, thank you for giving me this letter. I'll give you this other object to say thank you. And basically this would, I think it would be like an old boot, maybe. And you'd eventually, throughout the game, as it went along, you would be able to just give that boot to somebody else and they'd go, oh, thanks. And basically it would come in and out of the game every few hours or so. You just come across this person and say, oh look, you've got this. If I believe correctly, they originally wanted to make pretty much a port of The Link to the Past on the Game Boy. So it started off as an experiment, from what I've read and researched. So after the experiment went well, they thought, well, we could make a proper full project of this. So it was a bit of an offshoot. And in the end, basically, I think it just steamrolled into something that turned into a full game, which they were very pleased with. And to my knowledge, I think Shigeru Miyamoto rates it very, very highly as a Zelda game.
Link, er kommt total